The dust swirled across the barren fields like a warning as Josephine Nelson stared out at what had once been her family's hope and future, acres of withered cornstalks and cracked earth that hadn't seen real rain in 18 months. Her hands, once smooth and delicate, were now calloused and rough as the parched land itself, a testament to how quickly life could change in the unforgiving Kansas territory of 1872. Josephine Josie, to the few who still bothered to speak to her, leaned against the weathered porch post of the farmhouse her father had built with his own hands before the fever had taken him 3 winters ago. The morning sun cast long shadows across what remained of her world. The small 2-story clapboard house with peeling white paint, a barn that housed 1 stubborn mule and no cattle, and fields that had once promised prosperity but now mocked her daily with their emptiness. "Miss Josie," a small voice called from inside the house, "I found another mouse in the pantry." "Coming, Lily," Josie called back, pushing away from the post with a sigh. At 23, she hadn't imagined she'd be raising her 10-year-old sister alone on a failing farm. But then again, she hadn't imagined a lot of things about her current life. Inside the modest kitchen, Lily stood wide-eyed beside an overturned basket, pointing to where the pantry door stood ajar. Her blonde braids were messy from sleep, and she still wore her nightgown despite the late morning hour. "Third one this week," Josie said, grabbing the broom. "They're as hungry as the rest of us, I suppose." "Are we going to be hungry again today?" Lily asked, her small face serious in a way no child should be. Josie forced a smile. "No, we still have those beans Mrs. Hoffman gave us, and I'm going to make cornbread with the last of our meal." She didn't mention that after today's meal, the pantry would be as empty as their fields. Didn't mention how the townspeople had slowly stopped extending credit at the general store, or how the neighbors who'd once brought casseroles after their father died now crossed the street to avoid conversation. Bad luck could be catching in these parts, and 3 years of crop failure had branded the Nelson farm as cursed. After chasing away the mouse and setting to work on their meager breakfast, Josie tried to ignore the hollow feeling in her stomach. She'd been giving most of her portion to Lily for weeks now. The loud knock at the front door startled them both. "Who could that be?" Lily asked, hope brightening her features. "Maybe it's Mr. Thompson bringing us that flour he promised." Josie doubted it. Jacob Thompson had been the last of their neighbors to stop visiting 2 months ago, when his wife had convinced him that helping the Nelson sisters was throwing good resources after bad. Still, she smoothed her apron and tucked a stray lock of auburn hair behind her ear before opening the door. It wasn't Jacob Thompson. The man standing on her porch was tall, his broad shoulders blocking the morning sun. The brim of his well-worn Stetson cast shadows over eyes the color of a summer sky. His clothes were dusty from the road, but even trail-worn. The stranger carried himself with an easy confidence that seemed out of place on her failing farm. "Miss Nelson," his voice was deep with the slightest hint of a southern drawl. "Yes," she replied cautiously. Strangers rarely brought good news these days. "Name's Matthew Austin." He removed his hat, revealing dark hair that curled slightly at the temples. "I believe I purchased the lien on your property from the bank in Topeka." Josie's heart plummeted to her worn boots. The bank had finally done it, sold her family's land right out from under her. She'd been expecting it for months, ever since she'd failed to make the last mortgage payment, but the reality of it standing on her porch, all 6 feet of him, made her knees weak. "I see," she managed, gripping the doorframe for support. "How long do we have before you take possession?" Matthew Austin studied her face, seeming to note the dark circles under her green eyes, the proud tilt of her chin despite the fear she couldn't quite hide. "That's not why I'm here, Miss Nelson," he said, placing his hat back on his head. "I'm here to make you a proposition." Before she could respond, the sound of hooves pounding up the dirt drive drew both their attention. 3 riders approached, dust billowing behind them like a storm cloud. Josie recognized them immediately. Sheriff Miller and the Langston brothers, the most prosperous farmers in the county. "Trouble?" Matthew asked quietly, his hand moving unconsciously toward his hip, where she noticed for the first time the holstered revolver. "They've been trying to convince me to sell what little livestock I have left," she said, stepping out onto the porch. "For a fair price, they say, though their idea of fair gets lower each time they visit." The riders pulled up in front of the house, and Sheriff Miller removed his hat, revealing a balding head gleaming with sweat despite the mild spring morning. "Miss Nelson," he called, his tone falsely jovial, "I see you've met Mr. Austin." "Just now," she replied, crossing her arms over her chest. "Then he's informed you of the situation?" The taller Langston brother, Edmund, leaned forward in his saddle. "About the bank." Matthew stepped forward, placing himself slightly ahead of Josie. "I was just explaining to Miss Nelson that I've purchased the lien on her property, gentlemen." "Well then," Sheriff Miller said, his smile not reaching his eyes, "I suppose that settles it. The lady will need to vacate, and you can take possession, Mr. Austin. I'm sure the Langston brothers would be interested in discussing a fair price for the land, once it's yours legally." "I don't recall saying anything about eviction," Matthew replied evenly. "In fact, I was about to propose a partnership with Miss Nelson." 5 pairs of eyes turned to him in surprise, Josie's most of all. "A partnership?" she echoed. "Yes, madam," he said, his gaze still fixed on the mounted man. "I've brought seed, drought-resistant wheat from my family's farm in Missouri, and I've got experience with dry farming techniques that might just turn this land productive again." Edmund Langston scoffed. "You're wasting your time, Austin. This land's been cursed since old man Nelson died. 3 years of crop failure isn't just bad luck." 3 years of drought, Matthew corrected mildly, which, last I checked, affects land regardless of who owns it. The difference is in how you work with what God gives you. The younger Langston brother spat tobacco juice into the dust. "You're a fool if you think you can make this worthless piece." "That'll be enough, gentlemen," Matthew cut in, his voice suddenly hard as granite. "I believe Miss Nelson and I have business to discuss. Privately." Something in his tone, perhaps the quiet confidence or the hand that again drifted toward his holstered gun, made the sheriff nod slightly. "Come on, boys," Sheriff Miller said to the Langston brothers. "Let's leave these two to their partnership discussion." He tipped his hat to Josie. "Madam?" As they rode away, Josie remained frozen on the porch, unable to process the rapid turn of events. This stranger had just claimed to own her farm, yet was offering to save it at the same time. "Mr. Austin," she began carefully, "I don't understand what kind of partnership you're proposing." Matthew turned to her, the morning sun highlighting the strong lines of his face. He was younger than she'd first thought, perhaps 28 or 30, with laugh lines just beginning to form around his eyes. "It's simple enough, Miss Nelson. I own the lien, which means legally I could take this land. But that's not my intention. I want to farm it, bring it back to life. I've got the seed, the knowledge, and the resources to invest. What I don't have is enough hands for the work." He paused, studying her face. "I propose we work this land together. Split the profits 50-50 when harvest comes." "And if the crops fail again?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Something flickered in Matthew's eyes, determination, perhaps, or a stubbornness she recognized all too well from her own reflection. "Then I'll have lost some seed and time," he said with a slight shrug. "But you'll be no worse off than you are now, and you'll have kept your home through the summer at least." From inside the house, Lily appeared in the doorway. "Josie, the cornbread's burning," she said, her curious gaze fixed on the stranger. Matthew smiled at the girl, tipping his hat. "Well, hello there, miss. You must be Lily." Lily's eyes widened. "How do you know my name?" "The banker in Topeka mentioned your sister was raising you alone," he explained gently. "Said you were the smartest student in the schoolhouse." "I was," Lily corrected, a shadow crossing her young face, "before we couldn't afford the books anymore." Josie felt the familiar stab of guilt and failure. She'd promised their father on his deathbed that she'd make sure Lily got an education, but that promise, like so many others, had withered with the crops. Matthew nodded thoughtfully. Well, a partnership with your sister might just fix that. Smart girls should have books, I always say. Lily looked hopefully at Josie, who felt the weight of decision pressing down on her shoulders. This man was still a stranger, his proposition unexpected and potentially dangerous. Yet what choice did she have? The farm was already lost to the bank. At least this way, they might stay in their home a bit longer. "Mr. Austin," she said finally, "I appreciate your offer, but I need to think about it. This is all rather sudden." "Of course," he replied, taking a step back. "I'll be in town at the Silver Dollar Hotel. Take the day to consider, but—" He glanced toward the barren fields. "Planting season's already started, Miss Nelson. Every day counts now." After he'd ridden away, Josie found herself standing in the middle of her dying fields, desperately trying to make sense of the morning's events. The sun beat down on her neck as she knelt to scoop up a handful of the parched soil, letting it sift through her fingers like the last grains in an hourglass. "What would you do, Pa?" she whispered to the wind. Her father had been a proud man, suspicious of outsiders and charitable offers alike. "Nothing comes free in this world, Josie girl," he'd always said, "especially not from strangers." But he'd also been practical. When the first crop failed after his death, he wouldn't have let pride stand in the way of saving the farm. And he certainly wouldn't have let Lily go hungry. By sunset, Josie had made her decision. She hitched their mule to the small wagon and drove the 5 miles into town with Lily beside her, clutching an old quilt against the evening chill. Riversbend wasn't much as frontier towns when a single dusty street lined with false-fronted buildings, most of them weathered and in need of paint. Once, Josie had known every face here, had been greeted with friendly waves and invitations to socials. Now, as she tied the mule outside the Silver Dollar Hotel, she felt the stares of former friends turned cold with judgment and superstition. "Look, it's the Nelson girl," someone whispered too loudly from the boardwalk. "Heard she finally lost the farm to the bank." "About time," another voice replied. "That land's been nothing but a curse since her pa died." Josie straightened her shoulders and took Lily's hand, guiding her up the hotel steps as if she couldn't hear the whispers trailing behind them like poisonous smoke. The hotel lobby was small but clean, with a pot-bellied stove in the corner and a few mismatched chairs for guests. The clerk behind the desk, young Tommy Williams, whose mother had once brought the Nelson family a ham when their father died, avoided Josie's eyes as she asked for Matthew Austin. "Room 3, top of the stairs," he mumbled, suddenly very interested in the ledger before him. Matthew answered her knock immediately, as if he'd been waiting. He'd cleaned up since the morning, his dark hair still damp from washing, his blue chambray shirt free of trail dust. "Miss Nelson," he said, genuine pleasure warming his voice, "and Miss Lily, please, come in." The hotel room was sparse, a narrow bed, a washstand with a chipped basin, and a single chair by the window. Matthew gestured to the chair for Josie and perched on the edge of the bed, offering Lily a small wrapped package. "Peppermint drops," he explained as the girl's eyes lit up. "My mother always said they were good for thinking, and I figured you two had some serious thinking to do today." "Thank you," Josie said, watching Lily unwrap the candy with more excitement than she'd shown in months. "And you're right. We have been thinking." She took a deep breath. "I'd like to hear more about this partnership, Mr. Austin." "The details, if you please." Matthew nodded, his expression becoming businesslike. "I propose a simple arrangement. I provide the seed, equipment, and expertise. You provide the land and labor, yours and any hands we can hire when needed. We split all profits 50-50 after expenses. And the mortgage, the lien you purchased, will be considered paid in full after 2 successful harvests," he said without hesitation. "Or 5 years, whichever comes first, regardless of crop success." Josie's eyes widened slightly. "That's generous." "It's practical," he corrected. "I need this to work as much as you do, Miss Nelson. I've invested a considerable sum in that lien and the seed I've brought." "Why?" The question that had been burning in her mind all day finally escaped. Why this farm? Why us? You must have passed dozens of more promising properties on your way from Missouri. Something flickered across Matthew's face, a shadow of memory or pain quickly masked by a casual smile. Let's just say I have my reasons for believing in second chances, Miss Nelson. I've seen good land come back from worse than this. Lily, who had been quietly savoring her peppermint drop, suddenly spoke up. Is it true what you told those men, that you know how to make things grow even without rain? Matthew's smile became genuine as he addressed the girl. Well, not exactly without rain, Miss Lily, but I know techniques that make the most of what little rain does fall. My father farmed in parts of Missouri where drought was common. He learned methods from farmers who'd come from even drier places, ways to conserve moisture in the soil, crops that need less water, and how to plant to protect against the wind. Can you teach me? Lily asked eagerly. Josie tries, but she says farming doesn't come natural to her like it did to Pa. Josie felt her cheeks warm. Lily, Matthew chuckled. I'd be happy to teach you both. In fact, that's part of the bargain. My knowledge for your hard work. He turned his attention back to Josie. So, Miss Nelson, do we have an agreement? Josie studied the man before her, searching for signs of deception or hidden motives. His eyes met hers steadily, clear blue and unguarded. There was kindness there, yes, but also something else, a determination that matched her own desperate need to save her family's legacy. Yes, Mr. Austin, she said finally, extending her hand. We have an agreement. His large hand enveloped hers, warm and calloused from work. Call me Matthew, he said. Partners should be on a first-name basis, don't you think? Then you must call me Josephine, she replied, or Josie if you prefer. Josie, he repeated, as if testing the feel of it on his tongue. It suits you. Their hands remained joined a moment longer than necessary, and Josie felt an unexpected flutter in her chest, something she hadn't experienced since Jacob Thompson's son had kissed her behind the church 2 summers ago, before his family had joined the exodus from her life. When do we start? She asked, withdrawing her hand and tucking it safely in her lap. Tomorrow at dawn, Matthew said, all business once more. I've already arranged for a wagon of supplies to be delivered, seeds, some tools, and provisions for the 3 of us. Provisions? Lily perked up. Can't work on empty stomachs, Matthew explained with a wink to the girl, and I recall seeing a mighty empty pantry this morning. Josie stiffened slightly. We don't need charity, Mr. Austin, Matthew, just a fair chance. His expression softened. Not charity, Josie. Investment. Well-fed partners work better. Simple business sense. She wanted to argue further, but the memory of Lily's hollow-cheeked face in recent weeks stopped her. Pride wouldn't feed her sister. Thank you, she said instead, her voice barely audible. On the wagon ride home, with Lily dozing against her shoulder, Josie watched the stars emerge above the Kansas plains and wondered if she'd just made the wisest decision of her life or the most foolish. Either way, for the first time in months, she felt something dangerous stirring in her heart. Hope. True to his word, Matthew arrived at dawn the next day, driving a wagon loaded with supplies. Behind him trailed another wagon carrying a strange-looking plow unlike any Josie had seen before. It's a special design, Matthew explained as he helped unload sacks of cornmeal, flour, and beans into their nearly empty pantry. Cuts deeper into the soil but disturbs it less, helps keep moisture from evaporating. Over breakfast, real coffee and flapjacks that made Lily squeal with delight, Matthew laid out his plan for the farm. They would plant only half the acreage this first season, focusing on the sections with the best soil and natural wind protection. The wheat I've brought is turkey red, he explained, spreading a handful of rust-colored seeds on the table. Mennonite families brought it from Russia to Kansas a few years back. It needs less water than most varieties and can withstand harsh winters. I've heard of it, Josie nodded, but the seed's expensive. The Thompsons tried to get some last year but couldn't afford it. Matthew smiled. I have connections with a Mennonite community near my family's farm in Missouri. They were generous. By mid-morning, they were in the fields, Matthew behind the plow and Josie walking alongside, learning the principles of dry farming as they worked. "The key is keeping a dry layer of soil on top," he explained, wiping sweat from his brow. "Acts like a blanket to keep moisture from escaping from deeper down. After every rain, even a light one will need to break up the crust that forms." Josie nodded, trying to absorb every word. This was so different from her father's methods, which had served him well enough in years with normal rainfall, but had failed completely during the drought. Lily flitted between them, carrying water and asking endless questions that Matthew answered with patient detail. By sunset, they had prepared 5 acres for planting a small start, but more progress than Josie had made alone in weeks. As days stretched into weeks, a rhythm developed on the Nelson farm. Each morning, Matthew arrived at dawn from his room in town. They worked until the midday heat became unbearable, took a brief rest during the hottest hours, then continued until dusk. After dinner, which they took together at the Nelson table, Matthew would ride back to town, returning the next day to start again. Gradually, Josie began to see changes not just in the land, which now had neat rows of emerging wheat sprouts despite the continuing drought, but in herself and Lily. The constant gnawing hunger had disappeared. Lily's cheeks had filled out, and she laughed again, racing through the fields to report on the progress of her section, which Matthew had designated as her special responsibility. One evening in late May, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the sky in brilliant oranges and purples, Lily fell asleep on the swing, exhausted from a day of helping Matthew build a small irrigation system from the creek that ran along the property's edge. "She's something special," Matthew said softly, nodding toward the sleeping child. "Smart as a whip and twice as determined." "She's like our father," Josie replied, her voice tinged with both pride and sadness. "He never gave up on anything, not even when the fever took hold. Kept talking about next season's planting right up until the end." Matthew was quiet for a moment, his eyes on the darkening fields. "My father was the same," he finally said. "Believed in the land more than anything, more than people sometimes." Something in his tone made Josie look at him more carefully. "You don't talk much about your family." "Not much to tell that matters now." His jaw tightened slightly. "They're gone. Farm, too. Fire took it all 3 years ago while I was away fighting in the remnants of the war." Josie's hand moved involuntarily to cover his where it rested on the porch railing. "I'm sorry," she said simply. He turned his hand over, his calloused palm against hers. "Thank you. It was a hard homecoming. Finding nothing but ashes where your life used to be changes a man." "Is that why you came here?" she asked gently. "Looking for, what? Redemption? A fresh start?" Matthew's blue eyes met hers, suddenly vulnerable in a way she hadn't seen before. "Maybe both. When I heard about your farm at the bank in Topeka, a good piece of land failing from drought, not poor management, it seemed like a sign, a chance to build something again." The honesty in his voice touched something deep inside Josie, a recognition of shared pain and resilience. Before she could respond, a distant rumble drew both their attention to the western horizon, where dark clouds were building. "Is that?" she whispered, hardly daring to hope. Matthew stood, his face breaking into a wide grin. "Thunder. Real thunder, not just heat lightning." For the next hour, they sat together on the porch steps, watching the storm approach across the plains, a towering wall of clouds illuminated by flashes of lightning. The wind picked up, carrying the sweet, unmistakable scent of rain. When the first heavy drops began to fall, Josie couldn't contain herself. She ran into the yard, face turned upward, arms spread wide as the rain soaked through her clothes and plastered her auburn hair to her face. "Josie!" Matthew called, laughing as he joined her in the downpour. "You'll catch your death!" "I don't care!" she shouted back, spinning in a circle. "It's raining, Matthew! Really raining!" Their laughter mingled with the sound of thunder as the heavens opened fully, drenching the parched earth with the first substantial rainfall in over a year. Impulsively, Josie grabbed Matthew's hands, pulling him into a spontaneous dance across the muddy yard. He followed her lead, his own laughter deep and genuine, until a particularly enthusiastic turn sent them both slipping. Matthew caught her as they fell, twisting so that she landed on top of him rather than in the mud. For a breathless moment, they stayed frozen, her hands on his chest, his arms around her waist, rain streaming down their faces. Something shifted in Matthew's expression, his laughter fading into something more intense as he looked up at her. "Josie," he said, her name barely audible above the storm. The sound of Lily's excited voice calling from the porch broke the moment. "Josie, Matthew, it's raining. Our wheat is getting rain." Josie scrambled up quickly, suddenly aware of how improper their position had been. Matthew followed more slowly, running a hand through his soaked hair as if to compose himself. "We should get inside," he said, his voice oddly rough. "Check that the roof isn't leaking." The rain continued through the night and into the next day, a gentle soaking rain that seemed to make the earth sigh with relief. When it finally stopped, the transformation was immediate. The air smelled different, the light reflected differently off the land, and the wheat sprouts seemed to have doubled in height overnight. But something else had changed as well. There was a new awareness between Josie and Matthew, a careful distance that hadn't existed before. When their hands accidentally brushed while checking the fields for wind damage, both pulled away quickly. Conversations that had flowed easily now contained awkward pauses and unfinished thoughts. "Did you and Matthew have a fight?" Lily asked on the third evening after the rainfall, as Josie tucked her into bed. "No, of course not," Josie replied, smoothing her sister's blonde hair. "Why would you think that?" "Because you both act strange now, like Mrs. Hoffman did around the new preacher after her husband caught them kissing behind the general store." "Lily Nelson," Josie exclaimed, feeling heat rise to her cheeks. "Where did you hear such gossip?" Lily shrugged innocently. "Everyone at school was talking about it before." Her voice trailed off, the reminder of how long it had been since she'd attended school dampening her usual spirit. Josie sighed, sitting on the edge of the bed. "Matthew and I didn't fight. We're just busy with the farm. And no, we certainly weren't kissing." Despite herself, she remembered the moment in the rain, how close his face had been to hers, the look in his eyes that had made her heart race. "Would it be bad if you did?" Lily asked, her young face serious. "Kiss him, I mean. I like Matthew. He makes you smile again." "It's complicated, Lily Bug," Josie said, using the childhood nickname their father had given her sister. "Matthew is our business partner, and he might not stay after the harvest." The thought sent an unexpected pang through Josie's chest. In just a month, Matthew Austin had become woven into the fabric of their daily lives. The idea of him riding away once the wheat was harvested left her feeling hollow. "He'll stay," Lily said confidently as she snuggled under her quilt. "He likes us too much to leave." Josie wished she could share her sister's certainty. But life had taught her that people left. Everyone eventually did. Her mother when Josie was barely older than Lily was now, her father to fever, the neighbors and friends who'd abandoned them when the crops failed. Why would Matthew be any different? The following morning, Josie rose earlier than usual, determined to regain the easy companionship that had developed between her and Matthew before the rainstorm. She was kneading dough for fresh bread when she heard the now familiar sound of his horse approaching. What wasn't familiar was the second set of hoofbeats accompanying him. Through the kitchen window, she saw Matthew dismounting in the yard alongside another rider, a woman in a fashionable riding habit, her blonde hair neatly arranged beneath a small hat. The stranger laughed at something Matthew said, placing a gloved hand on his arm with casual intimacy. Josie felt a stab of something that felt suspiciously like jealousy, which was ridiculous. Matthew was free to keep whatever company he chose. Still, she found herself hastily wiping flour from her hands and smoothing her hair before stepping onto the porch. "Good morning," she called, striving for a casual tone. "I didn't realize you were bringing company." Matthew turned, his expression brightening at the sight of her. "Josie, I was hoping to catch you before you headed to the fields. This is Miss Rebecca Harrington, daughter of James Harrington, who owns the bank in Topeka." The elegant woman extended a hand, her smile perfectly polite, though her assessing gaze took in Josie's simple calico dress and work-roughened hands. "Miss Nelson, how lovely to finally meet you. Matthew has spoken of your partnership at length." Something in the way she emphasized partnership set Josie's nerves on edge. "A pleasure, Miss Harrington. What brings you to our humble farm?" "Rebecca's father's hosting a social in Topeka this weekend," Matthew explained. "She's kindly extended an invitation to us. Thought it might be good for you and Lily to have a day off from the work." "And for potential investors to see the progress you've made," Rebecca added smoothly. "Daddy says if your methods prove successful, there might be interest in financing similar operations on other drought-affected properties." Josie's initial discomfort softened slightly. If their work could help other struggling farmers, that was certainly worth considering. Still, the idea of attending a social in Topeka surrounded by wealthy bankers and their daughters in fine clothes filled her with dread. "It's a generous invitation," she said carefully, "but I'm afraid we couldn't possibly—" "Oh, but you must," Rebecca interrupted. "Matthew insists you're the heart of this operation. The investors will want to hear from you directly about the improvements." She turned to Matthew with a smile that seemed practiced in its sweetness. "Isn't that right, Matthew dear?" The endearment struck Josie like a physical blow. Of course, Matthew and the banker's daughter. It made perfect sense, he with his ambitious plans, she with her father's financial connections. Josie suddenly felt foolish for the warmth she'd allowed herself to feel toward him. "I really think it would benefit the farm, Josie," Matthew said, either oblivious to her discomfort or choosing to ignore it. "And Lily would enjoy the trip. There's to be music and dancing." At the mention of her sister, Josie's resistance weakened. Lily had been working as hard as either of them, despite her young age. A day of entertainment would be a rare treat for her. "Very well," she conceded. "We'll attend, though I'm afraid we don't have suitable clothing for such an occasion." Rebecca's smile turned triumphant. "Oh, don't worry about that. I've brought some options from my own wardrobe that I believe can be altered to fit you. And I have the most darling dress for your sister from my younger cousin." Before Josie could respond to this presumptuous if well-intentioned gesture, Lily burst from the house, having apparently been eavesdropping from just inside the door. "A real party? In Topeka!" she exclaimed, her eyes wide with excitement. "With dancing and everything?" Rebecca laughed, a musical sound that made Josie feel even more painfully aware of her own rough edges. "Yes, indeed, Miss Lily, and I hear you're quite the dancer." "Matthew's been teaching me the Virginia reel," Lily said proudly. "He says I'm a natural." Josie turned a surprised look to Matthew, who had the grace to appear slightly embarrassed. "During lunch breaks," he explained. She was curious about city parties. The revelation that Matthew and Lily had developed this shared activity without her knowledge left Josie feeling oddly excluded. While she'd been mending clothes or preparing meals during their midday rests, apparently her sister and Matthew had been forming bonds she knew nothing about. "Well then," she said, forcing brightness into her tone, "I suppose we'll be attending a social in Topeka. When shall we leave?" "Saturday morning," Rebecca answered before Matthew could speak. "The party begins at 4:00. You'll stay overnight at my father's home, of course. It wouldn't do to have ladies traveling after dark." Her gaze flicked to Matthew. "Matthew will be staying with us as well. Father's quite eager to discuss his irrigation ideas further." Josie nodded stiffly, unable to ignore the implications. The banker's daughter hadn't ridden all this way merely to deliver an invitation. She was staking a claim, making it clear where Matthew belonged, and it wasn't on a struggling farm with a woman who could barely keep her sister fed. After Rebecca departed, with Matthew promising to escort her back to town, an awkward silence fell between them. "I'm sorry for not consulting you before accepting the invitation on your behalf," Matthew finally said. "It seemed like an opportunity too good to pass up." "It's fine," Josie replied, turning back toward the house. "As Miss Harrington pointed out, it could benefit the farm." Matthew caught her arm gently. "Josie, wait. There's something you should know about Rebecca." "You don't owe me any explanations about your personal affairs, Matthew," she interrupted, pulling away from his touch. "We're business partners, nothing more." The hurt that flashed across his face surprised her, but she hardened her heart against it. Getting attached to Matthew Austin would only lead to disappointment when he inevitably moved on, perhaps with a banker's daughter on his arm. "I'll see you tomorrow," she said firmly. "We have work to do before this social, if we're to be away for a day." The next 2 days passed in a flurry of farm work and preparations for their trip to Topeka. True to her word, Rebecca sent over dresses for Josie and Lily to try, along with a seamstress from town to make alterations. The kindness of the gesture only made Josie more uncomfortable, though she couldn't deny the transformation when she finally stood before the small mirror in her bedroom. The dress was deep green silk, simply cut but elegant, with delicate lace at the collar and cuffs. It had clearly been expensive once, though now slightly outdated in style, which explained Rebecca's willingness to part with it. Still, it was finer than anything Josie had worn since before her father's death. "You look like a princess," Lily breathed from the doorway, already dressed in her own borrowed finery, a pale blue frock with satin ribbons. Josie smiled, pushing aside her misgivings. "And you look like an angel. Pa would be so proud to see you all dressed up." "Do you think Matthew will think we look pretty?" Lily asked innocently. The question sent a flutter through Josie's stomach that she firmly suppressed. "I'm sure he'll think you look lovely," she replied carefully. "Now, let's finish packing. We have an early start tomorrow." Saturday morning dawned clear and mild, perfect traveling weather for the 30-mile journey to Topeka. Matthew arrived with a rented buggy, more elegant than their weathered farm wagon, and dressed in clothing Josie hadn't seen before, a well-cut dark suit that emphasized the breadth of his shoulders and the lean strength of his frame. "Ladies," he said, removing his hat as they emerged from the house with their small carpet bags. "You both look beautiful." Lily twirled happily, showing off her dress, but Josie merely nodded her thanks, trying to ignore how handsome Matthew looked, or how his gaze lingered on her longer than necessary. The journey to Topeka passed pleasantly enough, with Matthew pointing out landmarks and sharing stories that kept Lily entertained. Josie found herself gradually relaxing, drawn despite herself into their easy conversation. "Have you been to many fancy parties, Matthew?" Lily asked as the outskirts of Topeka came into view, a proper city compared to the small settlement of Riversbend. "A few," he admitted, "though none I enjoyed particularly. Too much talk of business and not enough genuine conversation." "Is that why you prefer farming?" Josie found herself asking. "For the genuineness of it?" Matthew glanced at her, something warm in his eyes. "Partly. The land doesn't lie or pretend. It gives back exactly what you put into it, no more, no less." "Unless there's a drought," Josie pointed out dryly. He laughed. "Fair point. But even then, there's a certain honesty to it. Nature makes no promises about being fair." "Neither do people," she said softly, more to herself than to him. The Harrington home proved to be exactly as grand as Josie had feared, a stately 2-story brick mansion set back from the street, with manicured gardens and a circular drive where well-dressed servants waited to take their buggy. Rebecca greeted them at the door, resplendent in a fashionable lavender gown that made Josie instantly conscious of her borrowed dress. But the young woman was gracious, if slightly condescending, as she showed them to their rooms. "You'll want to rest before the party," she told Josie. "Maria will help you with your hair." She patted Lily's head affectionately. "And this little one can join my younger sisters in the nursery for tea." "I'm not little," Lily protested. "I'm 10 years old and help run a farm." Rebecca's tinkling laugh held no real mirth. "How charming. Well, Farmer Lily, the girls will be delighted to hear all about your adventures. Matthew, Father is waiting for you in his study." As they separated Lily to the nursery, Matthew with Rebecca to meet her father, and Josie to her assigned guest room, Josie felt increasingly out of place. The room itself was larger than the entire main floor of their farmhouse, with a 4-poster bed and heavy brocade curtains that probably cost more than their entire wheat crop would yield. The maid, Maria, arrived soon after to help with her hair, skillfully arranging Josie's auburn waves into an elegant style adorned with a borrowed pearl comb. Looking in the large dressing table mirror, Josie barely recognized herself. The woman reflected there seemed a stranger, someone who might belong in this world of wealth and privilege. But when she descended the stairs for the party, the illusion quickly faded. The Harrington home was now filled with Topeka's elite bankers, merchants, and landowners in formal attire, the women glittering with jewelry that represented more wealth than Josie had seen in her lifetime. She stood frozen at the bottom of the staircase, panic threatening to overwhelm her, when a familiar voice spoke from beside her. "You look like you're facing a firing squad rather than a social gathering." Matthew had appeared at her elbow, offering his arm with a reassuring smile. He looked even more handsome in the warm lamplight, his dark hair neatly combed, his blue eyes bright against his sun-darkened skin. "I don't belong here," she whispered, reluctantly placing her hand on his offered arm. "Neither do I," he replied softly. "But we're here for a purpose, remember? To secure interest in our farming methods." He emphasized the word "our" in a way that steadied her nerves slightly. "Where's Lily?" she asked, scanning the crowd. "Being thoroughly spoiled by Rebecca's younger sisters. Last I saw, they were teaching her to play the pianoforte and stuffing her with enough sweets to ensure she won't sleep for days." Despite her anxiety, Josie couldn't help smiling at the image. "She'll be impossible to live with after this." "Worth it to see her happy, though," Matthew said, guiding her toward a group of distinguished-looking men. "Now, come meet Mr. Harrington. He's eager to hear about our dry farming techniques." The next hour passed in a blur of introductions and explanations. To Josie's surprise, she found herself speaking confidently about the methods they had implemented, the improvements they had seen even with limited rainfall, and their hopes for the coming harvest. The men listened with genuine interest, asking thoughtful questions that she sometimes answered before Matthew could speak. "You're quite knowledgeable for a—" one gentleman began before trailing off awkwardly. "For a woman," Josie finished with a raised eyebrow. "Or for a farmer's daughter." The man had the grace to look embarrassed. "I merely meant for someone so young. Most innovative agricultural techniques come from those with decades of experience." "Necessity is a powerful teacher, Mr. Peterson," Matthew interjected smoothly. "And Miss Nelson is a remarkably quick study. She's implemented adaptations to my methods that I wouldn't have considered." Josie glanced at him in surprise. Matthew had never mentioned that he valued her contributions so highly. As the evening progressed, she found herself gradually relaxing. The music was pleasant, the food abundant, and the conversation less intimidating than she'd feared. Several times, she caught Matthew watching her from across the room, a smile playing at his lips when she successfully navigated a complex social interaction or made one of the stern-faced bankers laugh. It was during one such moment of shared, silent communication that Rebecca appeared at Matthew's side, claiming his attention with a possessive hand on his arm. Josie looked away quickly, only to find Mr. Harrington himself approaching her. "Miss Nelson," the banker said jovially, "I must say, you've made quite an impression on my colleagues. They're talking about organizing a visit to your farm to see these methods in action." "That would be welcome," Josie replied, genuinely pleased. "Though the real test will come with the harvest." "Indeed," Harrington nodded thoughtfully. "But early indicators are promising from what Matthew tells us. You're fortunate he came along when he did." "Yes," Josie agreed, watching as Rebecca led Matthew onto the dance floor. "Very fortunate." The banker followed her gaze, his expression softening. "My daughter has had her eye on Mr. Austin since he first came to discuss purchasing your lien," he said conversationally. "She was quite put out when he insisted on this partnership rather than simply foreclosing on your property as I advised." Josie's attention snapped back to Harrington. "You advised him to foreclose?" "Of course. It was the sensible business decision. 3 years of crop failure, no male heir to work the land effectively. Forgive my bluntness, Miss Nelson, but your situation was untenable." He sipped his wine casually. Matthew, however, was most insistent, said he saw potential where others saw only failure. Rather romantic notion for a businessman, don't you think? Before Josie could respond, the orchestra began a lively Virginia reel, and Lily appeared suddenly at her side, tugging on her hand. "Josie, it's the dance Matthew taught me. Come watch." Grateful for the interruption, Josie allowed herself to be pulled to the edge of the dance floor, where couples were forming lines. To her surprise, Matthew broke away from Rebecca, crossing the room with determined strides. "Miss Nelson," he said formally, though his eyes danced with the same warmth she'd come to cherish during their long days working side by side. "Would you do me the honor of this dance?" "Oh, but I don't," she began, only to be interrupted by Lily. "She'd love to," her sister exclaimed. "I told Matthew you used to be the best dancer in Riversbend before Pa died, remember?" Put on the spot and acutely aware of Rebecca's narrowed gaze from across the room, Josie had little choice but to accept Matthew's outstretched hand. "It's been years," she warned as he led her to the line of dancers. "Just follow my lead," he murmured, his breath warm against her ear. "Like in the fields." The music swelled, and Josie found herself swept into the familiar patterns of the Virginia reel, advancing, retreating, twirling under Matthew's raised arm as they moved down the line of dancers. To her amazement, her body remembered the steps her mind had forgotten, moving in perfect synchronization with Matthew, as if they'd danced together 100 times before. "You lied," he accused playfully as they came together in the center of the line. "You dance beautifully." "I had a good teacher once," she admitted, breathless from both the exertion and his proximity. "My father loved dancing, said it was the only proper way for a man to hold a woman he wasn't married to." Matthew's eyes darkened slightly at her words, his hand tightening on hers as they separated for the next figure. When they came together again, he spoke so quietly she almost missed it beneath the music. "Josie, there's something I need to tell you about Rebecca." "Ladies' chain," called the dance master, and Josie was forced to move away, exchanging partners temporarily as the dance required. By the time she returned to Matthew's side, the moment had passed, and she saw Rebecca watching them with an expression that could only be described as calculating. The banker's daughter made her way determinedly toward them as the dance ended, but before she could reach them, Lily appeared again. "That was wonderful," the girl exclaimed. "Matthew, you have to dance with me next. You promised." With an apologetic glance at Josie, Matthew allowed himself to be claimed by the excited child, leaving Josie to face Rebecca alone. "He's quite charming, isn't he?" the blonde woman observed, her tone deceptively light. "Matthew has a way of making everyone feel special." Josie straightened her shoulders, refusing to be intimidated. "He's been a tremendous help to our farm. We're grateful for his expertise." Rebecca laughed softly. "My dear Miss Nelson, let's not pretend. I've seen how you look at him, and how could you not? A handsome man appears like a savior when all seems lost. But you should know that Matthew has ambitions beyond playing in the dirt with the farmer's daughters." The deliberate cruelty of the words stung, but Josie kept her expression neutral. "Mr. Austin's ambitions are his own concern, Miss Harrington, as are mine." "Indeed," Rebecca agreed with false sweetness, "though it would be a shame if his generosity toward you and your sister were misinterpreted. People might wonder what exactly he's getting in return for his investment." Josie felt heat rise to her cheeks, partly from anger, partly from the shameful knowledge that such rumors had likely already begun in Rivers Bend. She and Matthew spent nearly every day together, often alone in the fields. Proper or not, it had never occurred to her to worry about appearances when their survival was at stake. "Excuse me," she said stiffly. "I should check on my sister." The remainder of the evening passed in a blur of uncomfortable conversations and careful avoidance of both Matthew and Rebecca. When she finally escaped to her guest room, Josie found Lily already asleep in the adjoining chamber, exhausted from excitement and unaccustomed rich food. Sleep eluded Josie, however. She sat by the window, watching the moon rise over the unfamiliar city skyline, her mind churning with conflicting emotions. Rebecca's insinuations had forced her to acknowledge what she'd been trying desperately to ignore. Her growing feelings for Matthew Austin went far beyond gratitude or business partnership. But Rebecca was right about one thing. Matthew was ambitious. He spoke of bringing his dry farming techniques to other struggling regions, of changing how people thought about drought-resistant agriculture. Why would such a man tie himself to a small Kansas farm and a woman with nothing to offer but hard work and determination? A soft knock at her door startled her from her thoughts. Pulling a wrap around her nightgown, she opened it cautiously to find Matthew standing in the hallway, still fully dressed, though he'd removed his jacket and tie. "I saw your light," he said quietly. "May I speak with you for a moment?" Propriety demanded she refuse, but the earnest look in his eyes made her step aside. "Briefly," she whispered, leaving the door partially open for the sake of appearances. "Lily's sleeping." Matthew glanced toward the connecting door, then back to Josie. "I've been trying to talk to you all evening. You've been avoiding me." "It's been a busy night," she deflected, wrapping her arms around herself. "Josie." His voice was gentle but insistent. "What did Rebecca say to you?" She looked up in surprise. "What makes you think—" "Because you were fine until I saw you two talking after our dance, and because I know Rebecca can be territorial." Josie turned away, moving back to the window. "She merely pointed out some truths I'd been avoiding, about appearances and expectations." Matthew sighed heavily. "Rebecca and I are not courting, if that's what she implied. Her father may wish it, and she may have convinced herself it's inevitable, but I've made my feelings clear on the matter." A traitorous flicker of hope lit in Josie's chest, which she quickly extinguished. "Your personal affairs are not my concern, Matthew. I was more troubled by her suggestions about us, about what people might think of our arrangement." "To hell with what people think," he said with surprising vehemence, closing the distance between them. "Josie, look at me." Reluctantly, she turned to face him, startled by his proximity and the intensity in his blue eyes. "I came to your farm with one purpose, to build something meaningful again after losing everything. I thought it was just about the land, about proving my methods could work." He reached out slowly, as if giving her time to pull away, and tucked a stray lock of hair behind her ear. "I never expected to find someone like you." "Matthew," she whispered, her heart pounding so loudly she was certain he must hear it. "Let me finish," he said softly. "I've been trying to tell you for weeks now, but the timing never seemed right. Or maybe I was just a coward." His hand lingered at the side of her face. "You terrify me, Josephine Nelson. Your strength, your determination, the way you love your sister, how you fought for your land when everyone else had given up it, humbles me." Josie could scarcely breathe. "I'm just doing what anyone would do." "No," he said firmly. "You're doing what few would have the courage to do. And watching you, working beside you every day, it's changed everything for me." "What are you saying, Matthew?" she asked, needing to hear the words explicitly. His thumb gently traced the line of her cheekbone. "I'm saying that what began as a business arrangement has become something much more for me. I'm saying that I care for you, Josie. Deeply. And if you feel even a fraction of what I feel, I'd like your permission to court you properly." Joy bubbled up inside her, so intense it was almost painful. But caution hard-earned from years of disappointment held her back. "What about after the harvest? Your plans to bring your methods to other regions?" "Plans change," he said simply. "Or rather, they expand. Yes, I still believe in sharing these farming techniques where they're needed. But I found something else I believe in just as strongly." His hand dropped to take hers. "Someone else?" Josie looked down at their joined hands, hers small but strong from work, his large and capable. Hands that had labored side by side, bringing life back to land everyone else had abandoned. "I care for you too," she admitted softly. "But I'm afraid, Matthew, everyone leaves eventually. My mother, my father, our neighbors and friends when times got hard." "I'm not everyone," he interrupted gently, "and I'm not leaving. Not unless you send me away." The sincerity in his voice broke through the last of her resistance. With a small sound that was half laugh, half sob, she stepped forward into his embrace. Matthew's arms closed around her, strong and secure, as his lips found hers in a kiss that started gentle but quickly deepened with the release of weeks of unspoken longing. Josie's hands moved to his shoulders, then his neck, as she returned the kiss with equal fervor, allowing herself to believe, just for this moment, that happiness might be possible again. When they finally broke apart, both breathless, Matthew rested his forehead against hers. "I should go," he whispered reluctantly. "Before I forget myself entirely or someone discovers us and gives Rebecca's rumors substance." Josie nodded, though she made no move to release him. "When we return home tomorrow." "Everything changes," he finished for her, "and nothing changes. We'll still have a farm to run, a harvest to bring in, but we'll do it together, knowing exactly where we stand." He kissed her once more, quickly but with unmistakable promise. "Good night, Josie. Sleep well." After he'd gone, closing the door quietly behind him, Josie returned to the window seat, her fingers pressed to lips still tingling from his kiss. Outside, the moon had risen fully, casting silver light over the sleeping city. For the first time in years, she allowed herself to look toward the future with something more than grim determination. Hope, she was discovering, was a seed as drought-resistant as Matthew's turkey red wheat. Once planted, it could survive the harshest conditions, waiting patiently for the right moment to flourish. The journey back to River's Bend the following day was filled with a new awareness between them, shared glances, fingers brushing as Matthew helped her into the buggy, conversations that carried double meanings Lily was too young to detect. But beyond the sweet tension of new love, there was also a practical excitement about the future of their farm. Mr. Harrington and his associates had committed to visiting in 6 weeks to see their methods firsthand. If impressed, they would consider financing similar operations throughout the drought-affected regions of Kansas. "Just imagine," Matthew said as they passed the halfway point of their journey, his eyes bright with enthusiasm. "Farmers all across the state implementing these techniques, land that's been abandoned brought back to productivity." "Our land first," Josie reminded him, practical as always. "Let's make sure our own harvest succeeds before we start planning an agricultural revolution." He laughed, reaching across to squeeze her hand briefly. "Always keeping me grounded. That's one of the things I adore about you." The casual mention of adoration sent a pleasant warmth through Josie's chest. It still seemed surreal that this capable visionary man had chosen her, had seen value in her beyond her land or her labor. When they arrived back at the Nelson farm by late afternoon, the changes wrought by their absence were immediately apparent. The wheat had grown noticeably, healthy green shoots stretching toward the sun. The irrigation channels Matthew had dug from the creek were functioning perfectly, providing just enough moisture to supplement the recent rainfall. "It's working," Josie breathed, standing at the edge of the field. "It's really working." Matthew stepped beside her, sliding an arm around her waist in a gesture that felt both new and somehow familiar. "Did you doubt it would?" "Honestly." "Yes," she admitted. "After 3 years of watching everything wither and die, it was hard to believe anything could grow here again." He turned her gently to face him. "Some things need more than water to grow, Josie. They need faith, persistence." His eyes held hers intently. Love. The word hung between them, neither yet brave enough to claim it directly, but both recognizing its presence nonetheless. The weeks that followed took on a rhythm both familiar and new. They worked from dawn till dusk, tending the wheat, preparing additional acres for a second planting, and repairing long-neglected farm equipment. But now there were stolen kisses between tasks, lingering touches as they passed tools to one another, and quiet conversations by lamplight after Lily had gone to bed. News of their courtship spread quickly through River's Bend, eliciting reactions that ranged from genuine congratulations to thinly veiled skepticism. Some of the very neighbors who had abandoned Josie in her time of need now appeared at the farm with casseroles and offers of help, eager to align themselves with what increasingly appeared to be a successful venture. Josie struggled with resentment toward these fair-weather friends, but Matthew counseled forgiveness. "People are scared of failure," he told her one evening as they sat on the porch swing, his arm around her shoulders. "It reminds them of their own vulnerability. Now that they see success is possible, they want to be part of it." "You're too generous," she replied, nestling closer to his side. "Some of these same people wouldn't sell us flour when Lily was hungry." "I'm not saying forget," he clarified. "Just don't let bitterness take root. It's as destructive as any drought." By the time Mr. Harrington and his associates arrived for their inspection in late June, the transformation of the Nelson farm was remarkable. Nearly 30 acres of wheat stood tall and healthy, despite rainfall that remained below average. The innovative irrigation system Matthew had designed channeled every precious drop of water where it was needed most. "Extraordinary," Mr. Peterson, the banker who had questioned Josie's knowledge at the social, now declared as he surveyed the fields. "Simply extraordinary. And you say these techniques could be applied to any drought-affected land?" "With proper adaptation to local conditions, yes," Matthew confirmed. "The principles remain the same. Conserve moisture, select drought-resistant crops, manage the soil to prevent erosion and evaporation." "And what kind of yields do you anticipate?" Mr. Harrington asked, the businessman in him clearly calculating potential profits. Matthew glanced at Josie before answering. "We expect about 60% of what would be considered normal for this acreage in a good rainfall year. Less than ideal, but significantly better than the total losses many farmers are experiencing. And sustainable year after year," Josie added, "even if the drought continues." The bankers exchanged impressed glances. "Mr. Austin, Miss Nelson," Mr. Harrington said, "I believe we've seen enough to make a decision. My associates and I would like to establish a fund to provide loans to farmers willing to implement these methods, with your guidance, of course." Matthew's face lit up. "That's exactly what we'd hoped for, sir." "Additionally," Harrington continued, "we'd like to commission a pamphlet detailing your techniques for wider distribution, with appropriate compensation for your expertise, naturally." As the men discussed financial details, Josie found herself overwhelmed by the realization of how far they had come. Just 3 months ago, she had been facing the loss of everything: her home, her land, her ability to care for Lily. Now she stood on the threshold of not just saving her own farm, but potentially helping others save theirs as well. That evening, after the bankers had departed with promises of contracts to follow, Josie, Matthew, and Lily celebrated with a special dinner featuring a chicken Matthew had purchased in town and vegetables from the small kitchen garden that had also benefited from their improved irrigation. "Does this mean we're rich now?" Lily asked as she helped herself to a second serving of potatoes. Matthew chuckled. "Not rich exactly, but secure. The farm will be profitable, and the consulting work for Mr. Harrington's fund will provide additional income." "And we can afford books for school again?" Lily pressed, ever focused on her interrupted education. "Yes," Josie confirmed, smiling at her sister's priorities. "Books, new clothes, and maybe even piano lessons if Mrs. Thompson is still willing to teach you." "She'll be willing," Matthew said confidently, "especially after her husband sees how well our wheat is doing compared to his. Self-interest is a powerful motivator." After dinner, when Lily had gone to bed, Matthew took Josie's hand and led her out to the porch. The summer night was warm, the sky ablaze with stars, and the fields before them whispered with the promise of a successful harvest to come. "I've been thinking," he said, drawing her down beside him on the steps, "about the future." Josie leaned against his shoulder, content in a way she hadn't been for years. "The work with Harrington's fund will mean travel. Visiting other farms, demonstrating our methods, helping implement changes." He took a deep breath. "I'd like you to come with me. You and Lily." Josie sat up straight, looking at him in surprise. "Leave the farm? But after all we've done, not permanently," he clarified quickly. "This would always be our home base, but we could hire Jacob Thompson's son to manage things when we're away. He's a good worker, and it would give him experience running his own operation someday." Our home, Josie repeated softly, catching the significance of the word. Matthew, are you? He shifted position to face her directly, taking both her hands in his. I'm asking you to marry me, Josie. I know it hasn't been long, but I've never been more certain of anything in my life. I love you, your strength, your determination, your heart. I want to build a life with you, raise Lily together, have children of our own someday, if you want that too. Tears sprang to Josie's eyes, but they were tears of joy rather than the grief or fear that had dominated her life for so long. Yes, she whispered. Yes to all of it. I love you, Matthew. I think I started falling for you that first day when you stood up to the Langston brothers on my porch. He laughed, gathering her into his arms. And I fell for you watching you chase that mouse out of your pantry with nothing but a broom and sheer determination. Their kiss was both tender and passionate, a promise of the life they would build together, a life neither had dared to imagine just a few months earlier. The wheat harvest in late July exceeded even their most optimistic expectations. Neighbors who had once whispered about the cursed Nelson farm now came to help with the reaping, eager to learn the methods that had produced such abundance in a drought year. Jacob Thompson, who had been among the last to abandon Josie in her time of need, was among the first to approach Matthew about implementing the new techniques on his own struggling acres. Funny how success changes people's perception of luck, Matthew observed as they watched Thompson ride away with a copy of their newly printed pamphlet. Suddenly it's not a curse, but clever management. I don't care what they call it, Josie replied, as long as it helps them save their farms. Her generosity of spirit was one of the many reasons Matthew loved her. They were married in August. A simple ceremony in the Rivers Bend church, followed by a celebration that spread across the Nelson, now Austin farm. Lily, radiant as a bridesmaid in a new dress bought with the first profits from their wheat sale, danced with every gentleman present, proudly informing anyone who would listen that she would be attending the finest school in Topeka come September, where Matthew and Josie would be staying part-time for their work with Harrington's Agricultural Relief Fund. As the summer faded into a golden autumn, the Austin farm became a center of activity and learning. Farmers from as far away as Nebraska and Colorado came to see the innovative techniques that had produced a harvest when others had failed. Matthew and Josie worked side by side, teaching what they had learned, continuing to refine their methods, and planning for an even more productive season to come. In October, as they prepared for their first extended trip to Topeka, where they would help establish the headquarters of what was now being called the Austin Nelson Dry Farming Institute, Josie shared news that completed their joy. The doctor confirmed it this morning, she told Matthew as they stood together in their wheat field, now stubbled from harvest but ready for another planting. We'll have a baby in the spring. Matthew's whoop of delight echoed across the land as he swept her into his arms, spinning her in a circle of pure joy. A child, he breathed against her hair. Our child. A new life, Josie agreed, placing his hand over her still flat stomach, like the one you brought back to this land. As they stood together in the fading light, the land around them no longer barren but rich with possibility. Matthew thought about the strange twists of fate that had brought him to this moment, the fire that had taken his family and home in Missouri, the chance conversation in a Topeka bank that had led him to a struggling farm and the remarkable woman who refused to abandon it, the rain that had finally come just when they needed it most. Do you ever wonder, he asked softly, what would have happened if I hadn't purchased that lien, if I'd never come here? Josie considered the question seriously, her hand still covering his over their unborn child. I'd like to think we would have found each other anyway, she said finally, that some things are meant to be, regardless of the path. Like drought-resistant love, he suggested with a smile. Exactly, she agreed, rising on tiptoe to kiss him as the first stars appeared in the Kansas sky, the kind that endures no matter how harsh the conditions. And as they walked hand in hand back toward the house where Lily waited, the light from their windows a beacon in the gathering dusk, Both knew with absolute certainty that what they had planted together on this land and in their hearts would continue to grow and flourish for many seasons to come.